All right, now we're gonna go ahead and create a jewel button for our game. So let's start off by coloring in our background with a gray. So I have a gray already selected. It's a relatively darker gray. Go ahead and fill our background in with that. So now we have a more neutral background. Next, what we want to do is we want to grab our shape tool and we want to grab our ellipse tool. And then we're going to go ahead and create an ellipse and holding down shift to create a perfect circle. And we'll make it about that size. Next, let's go ahead and change the width of our stroke. So we're going to come right over here and we're going to type in the number 45. Hit enter. Let's see how that looks. Let's make it a little bit wider. So I'm going to put 55. Hit enter. Perfect. Next, let's change the color of our stroke. So we're going to come over here to this box that has a stroke around it. And we're going to select that. And then we're going to come over here to our color picker in that corner. And we need to select a yellow color. So I'm going to select a color probably somewhere over here. Maybe a little bit more towards the oranges. And maybe a little bit lighter. So somewhere about there should be good. We'll hit OK. Great. Next, let's go ahead and create the jewel part. So this is going to be the gold part that goes around our jewel. Next, let's create the jewel that will go in the center of our gold ring. So I'm going to use my shape tool once again, and starting in the middle, I'm going to hold down shift, and then we'll bring it up to about that size. And then we're going to grab that and we're going to turn off the stroke by hitting this white box with the slash through it, and we can turn on a fill by coming into our fill box. And we want to fill it with a gradient. So let's select our gradient. And we actually want to flip this around. We want the dark part to be on top and the light part to be on the bottom. So let's go ahead and click on this little tab right here. We'll double click and then we can drag that color up to white. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll double click the white over here and then we'll drag that down to the black. Hit OK. Perfect. Next, what we want to do is we want to center this in the middle of our document. So we'll center it right there. And then we want to grab our yellow ring and drag it above this. And we also want to center that. So we'll get that into the center. Next, we're going to add some little rivets around the edges of our gold ring. So using my circular tool, I'm going to go ahead and create a small circle. Hold down shift to keep its proportion. So we want it a little bit smaller than the width of our ring. And then we can go ahead and drag that into place to make sure it fits. Perfect. Next, what we want to do is we want to add an embevel to our circle. So we're going to come down to FX, and then we're going to come up to Embevel Emboss. And what we want to do is we want to change where it says Pillow Emboss. We want to change that to Inner Emboss. So once we have that selected, we can go ahead and change our depth to what we want. And so you see that kind of hardens and softens the depth of the embossing. So we're going to put it about in the middle. We're going to bring the size up to about 16 pixels, and then we're going to soften that. We might bring that up a little bit more on the size, so somewhere about there should be good. So now that gives us a three-dimensional rivet on our ring. Now I have my highlight set to 81% and my opacity set to 70%. So once this is all set up correctly, we can go ahead and hit OK. Next, we're going to add a drop shadow to that. So we're going to come back down to our effects and come to drop shadow. And I'm going to bring my opacity down to about 50%, maybe a little bit higher, about 60%. And I'm going to have the distance and the speed is going to be brought up so it has a harder edge. And then I'm going to bring the size down so it's a little bit smaller than my actual rivet. And I can turn that speed back up because I want it to be a little bit softer. So I'm going to turn it down actually, sorry. So I'll turn it down to about there. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the distance so it comes up a little bit more. So now we have that nice little drop shadow there. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my rulers by coming up to View, then coming down to Rulers. And now I get these rulers on the sides of my document. What I can do is I can click that ruler and drag down like so. And it should click right into the center of my document. And I'll do the same thing from this side. And that allows me to find out where the center of my document is. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my rivet and I'm going to place him right here in the center like so. And then I'm going to nudge him over so he's centered within my ring. And next, we're going to go ahead and turn on our transform tool. And this little guy right in the middle of our transform selection, that's the pivot point. So we can drag that wherever we want, and wherever we drop it, that's where it's going to pivot from. So if I drop it there, it's going to pivot around there. So what we want to do is we want to drag that right to the center of our document. And we can tell where that is because we pulled out these ruler lines, and that tells us where it is. So we just want to make sure we get it lined up with that, just like so. And then we're going to go ahead and rotate this around. But we want to make sure that we're holding down Shift while we do that, so we can rotate it to a perfect 45-degree angle. Then we can hit Enter. Next, let's go ahead and make a copy of this layer. So we'll hit Control J. And then we're going to go ahead and turn on the transform tool for that layer, and we're going to drag its pivot point right to the center like we did with the other one. And then we're going to go ahead and rotate that 90 degrees. Now, the reason why we rotated that 90 degrees was because from here to here is only 45 degrees. From there to there is 90 degrees because you have your 45 there and your 45 there. And that's why we rotated that 90 degrees. They're all going to be 90 degrees after this. So let's go ahead and hit Enter. And then we're going to make a copy of this layer. And we'll turn on the transform tool and drag the pivot point to the center of our document, just like so. And then we'll go ahead and rotate that another 90 degrees. Hit Enter, make a copy of that layer, and then we're going to turn on the transform tool and grab that pivot point and place it just like so, and then go ahead and rotate that another 90 degrees, then hit Enter. Now we're getting a little bit close to the edge over here, so something was a little bit off. That's all right. We can go ahead and use our arrow keys to kind of nudge it into place because we have a general idea of where that 45-degree angle area should be. So I'm going to go ahead and nudge this guy down maybe twice and over twice, maybe back. And then I'll come down to this guy over here and I'm going to nudge him down twice and then over twice. Perfect. Now you'll notice that when we rotated these, the shadows didn't rotate with it, which is really nice. They all stayed facing downwards because each one is still having the effect applied to it. It's not an actual rasterized image. And so Photoshop is smart enough that they can apply that same effect in the same angle of lighting. Next, what we want to do is we want to merge all these rivet layers together. So let's go ahead and select them all. And then we're going to right click and merge shapes. So now those are all one layer. And now let's right click and we're going to create this into a clipping mask. And the reason why we've done that is so that it clips off the edge of these shadows that are hanging over the edge. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to add a dark edge around the edge of our inner circle. So I'm going to come down to this layer that has the gradient on it, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on an effect, and the effect we're going to use is inner glow. Now, this isn't going to be a glow, it's actually going to be a shadow. So right now we can't see our white glow around the edge because we have our blend mode set to darken, so it's only going to show dark colors. So first off, we want to change our white color to the color black. Okay, and now you can see that edge a lot better. Next, let's go ahead and turn down the opacity just a little bit to about 75%. And then we're going to turn that size up a little bit more. We can also play with the choke a little bit, but for the most part, I think we're just going to leave that at about 6%. That should be good. And then we can go ahead and hit OK. Great. That brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you were able to lay out all the shapes and the shadows and highlights for your jewel button. In the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and paint this rim to look a lot more realistic. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. All right, let's go ahead and start painting the golden ring around our gem. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and switch over to our grab and move tool, and then we're just going to click on our ruler lines and drag them off. So that way they're no longer in the way. Next, we're going to go ahead and rasterize this layer that has our rivets on it because we're about to merge them together and we don't want the effect on the rivets to be applied to our ring. So we're going to right click on that layer and then we're going to come up to rasterize layer and then we're going to select both our layers and merge them together. So now that whole ring is one layer. Next, let's go ahead and create a new layer above that. And we're going to right click that layer and transform it into a clipping layer mask. Now, the way we paint this is going to be the exact same way we painted the blade on our sword and the metal part of the handle of our sword. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and select my yellow, and then I'm going to grab a really bright yellow. So somewhere about there should be good. Hit OK. And now I'm going to start painting with this. Now I'm going to switch over to a brush that has more texture, so maybe we can try this guy out right next to our paintbrush. And we're going to go ahead and start painting with that. I'm going to paint at 10% opacity, and actually I'll switch that to 20% opacity, and I'm just going to start painting like so, just getting my highlight in there. Now basically the entire surface is going to have highlight on it. Except for this underside, there's going to be a shadow, as this ring is going to be a little bit embeveled. Next, I'm going to go ahead and grab a darker version of this yellow. So I'll grab that yellow and come down like so. And since this is going to be a shadow, I'm going to make it a little bit cooler. So I'm going to come up towards my greens. So it's almost going to be a greenish yellow. Hit OK. And now let's go ahead and start filling in bottom areas of our ring. So right around here, it's going to get that shadow color. Same with underneath here. Now, because this jewel is going to be rounded like a sphere, it's going to be blocking the light that would be hitting the top surface right here. So rather than getting a highlight, this edge is going to get a shadow. Just like so. Now we can go ahead and select this dark shadow color that we have right here for our rivets, and we're going to start painting with that for our next layer. So we'll start adding it in just like this. And for this style, it's okay if you mess up a little bit, because what I'm going for is I'm trying to go for something that looks handmade, like it was almost like hammered out of gold or forged out of gold. Alright, now let's start getting some more detail in there. So I'm going to select this even darker version of our shadow color over here, and I'm going to start painting with it, but with a smaller brush size. And I'm just going to start painting in like so, and I'm going to start blending that shadow from my rivet onto the surface together. And over here where it started getting covered up, I'm going to go ahead and start painting that back in. Great. And now we can start adding some more detailed shadows on the edges. Great. Now let's go ahead and grab a white color, or almost white. So I'm going to come to about there, come more into my yellows, And now let's go ahead and start painting even brighter highlights, especially along these edges. Also on the top of our rivets, we're going to add some highlight, especially in these areas that got painted over. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a larger brush size, and I'm going to go ahead and start painting in some of this more light color all over the flat surface of the ring. Great. Now I got a little paint over the edges of my rivet, so I'm going to go ahead and come back to my rivet color and go ahead and fix those. So I'll just paint back over it. Same with here, same with over here, and we'll fix that also. Great. Next, let's go ahead and introduce a bounce light. So I'm going to come into my colors and I'm going to come into my blues because we want our bounce light to be a cool color, because a cool color with a warm color will look nice together. And then I'm going to come up to a light blue, somewhere about like so. And using my brush tool and putting my brush opacity at 10%, I'm going to go ahead and add a bounce light to the bottom of my rivet. So I'll probably add it right about there, and we're just going to have it round around this edge like so and blend it in. We'll do another one over here, and we'll put it on the opposite side but on the bottom. And then we'll go ahead and add that to the bottom rivets. Now on our bottom rivets, we can have it come all the way around, and I'll explain why here in a second. Now the reason why we had it come all the way around was because there's nothing over here and there's nothing over here. So it can get anything bouncing off onto the bottom of here from both sides. Right here, the bounce light on this side is going to be the bounce light coming from the glow of our gem. So that's why we left that out. So now we can go ahead and switch over to a yellow color. And we're going to go ahead and paint in the bounce light on this side, but with yellow. Great. Now I'm going to go ahead and select my dark shadow color here again. And what I want to do is I want to change it more towards the greens. So coming into my color picker, I'm going to drag it up towards my greens. And I'm going to start painting a little bit of green shadow in there. Now the reason for this is because if you look at reference of gold, gold tends to have a green shadow. So we're going to add just the tiniest bit of a green tint to our shadows. So we'll go ahead and start painting that in. But this will make it look a lot more realistic. Next, let's go ahead and introduce some orange in here. So I'm going to select my neutral yellow color. I can find some right there on that rivet. And then I'm going to come and bring it down into the oranges. So about there should be good. Hit OK. And now I just want to start painting in a little bit of orange in there, just so we have another layer of color. And it doesn't have to be everywhere, just in some areas. And there's not necessarily any specific spots you have to add it in. You just want to add some of that orange in there. Generally, probably keep it towards the edge of the shadows. Awesome. Next, let's go ahead and add a really bright highlight. So I'm going to change my color to a solid white. Then bringing my brush opacity all the way up to 80%, I'm going to go ahead and paint along the top of our ring like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and add some to the top of my rivet also, so just right there. Next, I'm going to go ahead and bring my brush opacity down to 30%, and then I'm going to start blending this in a little bit more, just like so. Same with on top of my rivets. And then we're going to add a little bit of some transparent white down this middle. We'll blend this rivet in, and we'll add some white down this middle also. Blend that in, and then we'll finish it all the way around our ring up to this point. Great. Now what we want to do is we want to start selecting colors and painting with them at full opacity. So I'm going to switch over to my color picker. I'll go ahead and select that color, and I'll start painting with that at full opacity. And then I'll select another color, so maybe that color right there. And I'll select this one. And you don't have to select every color, you just want to select some of them and start painting with them in areas at full opacity. This is going to make it look more like a painting, like I said before. Great. Now let's go ahead and zoom out and see how this looks from far away. Alright, I think it's looking pretty good. I think we need a little bit more shadow along these bottom edges, so I'm going to go ahead and select my shadow color, and then I'll go ahead and paint in some more shadows, and I'm going to paint them in at 30% opacity. And I think what we need is we just need them to be thicker. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. And I'm going to bring my brush opacity down to 10% because it's looking a little bit too dark for me. And then I'll do the same thing on this top side, bring my brush opacity up to 20%. And then I'm going to go ahead and select my yellow. So there's some yellow right here. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in some yellow back into this area because we're sort of losing the yellow and it's looking too white. So we'll go ahead and paint that in, and maybe a little bit over here also, a little bit over here. Great, I think that looks a little bit better. Now I'm noticing that we forgot to add a blue bounce light to this bottom part of our ring. So I'm going to go ahead and select this blue, and then I'm going to come up so that it's lighter. And then we can go ahead and paint that back in. So we're going to put it at 20% opacity. And I'm just going to paint along the bottom just like so. And then we also want to add some bounce light or glow light, whatever you want to call it, to this inside edge, because if this is getting bounce light right there, then this also needs to be getting some of that bounce light. So I'm going to select this yellow right here, and I'm going to begin painting with it right along that edge like so. And then we can come down here and do the same thing. Now my color is a little bit too dark, so I'm going to lighten it just a little bit for down here. And we'll go ahead and start painting again. That works much better. All right, Now, just to skip redundancy, I went ahead and skipped forward in this part of the course, and all I did is I went through there and I grabbed those mid colors and then painted them in with 100% opacity like we've done before, just to give it that painter look. And then I went in there and I painted in some scratches and divots, and now we're going to go ahead and add in some highlights for those. So the scratches and divots are just like when we did scratches and divots for our sword blade. Now, the color that I selected was this shadow color from my rivets. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's select a light yellow color. So I'm going to select this color right here. Then switching over to my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and start adding those highlights in. So I'll add one in right there. I'll add one on the bottom of here. And so just remember, the light source is coming from the top. And so we're going to be getting these highlights on the bottom of our scratches and rivets. Or divots, sorry about that. And then we're going to go ahead and select this yellow color right here and use that for the highlight on this guy because he's in shadow. Alright, let's go ahead and zoom out and see how that looks. Perfect. Now he could maybe use one more over here, so I'm going to go ahead and select this color, and I'll go ahead and paint in a scratch right across like so, and maybe I'll give it a little bit of a curve. And then I'll come back to my yellow color, and we'll add in that highlight. Alright, that brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned how to paint the golden ring on your gem. You learned how to do the highlights and the shadows, and you also learned how to add a bounce light to it to make it look more realistic. And lastly, you added in some scratches and texturing to your ring. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one where we're going to go ahead and start creating the gem. Alright, let's go ahead and build our gem. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some color to our gem. So let's go ahead and select the shape that makes up the gem background, which is the one with the gradient on it. So we'll go ahead and select that shape on the layer, and then we're going to add a new layer above that. And on this layer, we're going to go ahead and fill it in with whatever color we want our gem to be. So in this case, I want my gem to be an aqua blue. So I'm going to come into my blues, and I don't want to make this completely saturated, but somewhere about there should be good. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. Next, let's go ahead and change the blend mode on this layer from normal to overlay. And then if you want to adjust your color to the exact color you want, turn on your hue and saturation panel by hitting Control U or Command U. And then you can go ahead and change the color by dragging the hue across this bar. So if you want it yellow or orange, but I'm going to keep it at my blue. You can also play with the saturation. Mine's already pretty saturated, but that's what it would look like at full saturation, less saturation, but I'm going to keep it about where I'm at. And you can also play with the lightness and the darkness. So I might actually bring mine down just a little bit darker, and then we'll hit OK. Great. Next, let's add in our highlights. So I'm going to add a new layer above this, and then I'm going to switch over to the color white. And then I want to make sure I'm on a soft edged brush. So I'm on this brush right here, and then I'm going to bring my brush size up like so to about that size, and I'm going to start painting in my highlight. I also want to bring my brush opacity down to 10%, so I'll hit the number 1 on my keyboard, and then I can start painting right here, just like so. And once I get a big area painted in like so, I'm going to bring my brush size down a little bit more, and then I can continue painting in that area. Then I'll bring it down a little bit more and continue painting, and then I'll bring it down just a little bit more and continue painting. Great. So we want that to be a pretty soft edge. Next, let's go ahead and move down here to this bottom area, and we're going to go ahead and paint around the edge like so. And we'll just keep doing that until we get another nice highlight down here. And I have this coming around a little bit too far up, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my erase tool. Make sure you're on a soft edge brush also. And I'm going to bring my brush size down, and I'm going to go ahead and erase away some of that like so. Now lastly, I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to my brush and put my brush opacity at 100%, and I'm going to go ahead and paint in a spot like so, because I want that to be my main highlight point on my jewel. Alright, creating a jewel for this project is that simple, and you can see when we zoom out, it looks pretty dang realistic. Now we can also play around once again with the coloring down here, so we can hit Control U and we can change that color to see what it looks like with those highlights now. but I'm going to keep it at my original color, and I might darken it a little bit more and bring up the saturation. So somewhere about there. Hit OK. Great. That brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you learned how to create the highlights and the color for your jewel. You also learned how you can use your hue and saturation panel to adjust the colors of your gem. In the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and place some objects inside of our gem. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Alright, let's go ahead and add an object into our button. So the first thing we're going to add into it is we're going to add a symbol. So maybe this is a button that is representing a symbol or type of power for your character. So let's go ahead and create a new layer, and this new layer is going to be underneath our green layer. And then we're going to stick with our color white, and then we want to grab a brush tool that has more of an interesting texture. So maybe a brush tool like this one right here. Maybe not that one. Maybe something like that might be interesting. See how that looks. That's pretty cool. Alright, let's bring our brush size down. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint our symbol. So I think my symbol is just going to come straight down like here. And you can play around with what type of symbol you want to do. There's no right or wrong symbol. You can do whatever you need for your game. So just something like so. And then I might add a line going through like that, and then maybe a spot like that. Cool. That's a pretty cool symbol. Next, let's go ahead and add a glow to that symbol. So I'm going to add an effects to that, and I'm going to come up to outer glow. And then I'm going to change my color to this aqua blue, and I'm going to make it completely saturated. Then I'm going to hit OK. And then I can play around with my opacity. So I think I'll leave that at about 80%, 77%. And then we can change our speed. So I'm going to bring that down all the way to 0% because I don't want very much speed with that. I want it to be pretty soft on the edges. And then we can also play around with the size. And I think I want it to be pretty small so we get that really nice tight glow around it. And then we can go ahead and hit OK. And let's go ahead and shrink it down just a little bit so that we can see it better in the center. Then I'll recenter it like so. And I think it would actually look better a little bit more over like this. Now let's go ahead and add some particles in there. So if I switch back over to my brush tool and I select a round brush like this one right here with a hard edge, I can go ahead and add in some particles in there. So I'm going to bring my brush size really small, and I'm going to put my brush opacity at 40%. And I'm just going to add a couple of little dots in there like so. And these might just be small little magical particles that are coming off of our symbol. Then I can bring my brush size up and do a couple of larger ones. And then I'm going to bring my brush opacity to 80%, and I'll bring my brush size down, and I'll add a couple of those in also. And I can paint in some larger ones too, right along those edges. And that just makes it look a little bit more interesting. So if you ever have a close-up of your button, they'll have something really interesting to look at, and there'll be a lot of detail in there. Now let's go ahead and create 2 more gems that we can put different objects in and change the colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to Image and then come down to Canvas Size. And then I'm going to change the width to 1800 pixels. So we're going to multiply the width by 3 so we can add 2 more in there. And I'm going to leave the height at 600. And then this little dot right here, I want to bring this over to the left side. That way it adds it to my right side of my page. And then my background color, I'm going to go ahead and click that little box and select this background color right here so it creates that same background color all the way across. We'll hit OK. And now we can go ahead and hit OK. Now let's go ahead and take all of our layers and put them into a folder, and then we're going to copy that folder 2 times. Then we're going to grab our first copy and we'll drag it over like so. We want to drag that right into the center of our document. And then we're going to grab our other one and drag that over like so. And we want to get that so that it's equally spaced out. And you can tell because you'll get that little arrow in between each one. Now let's start with this middle one. So I'm going to come back down to that layer and open up that folder. And we can start off by changing the color. So I'm going to come into my color layer and I'm going to turn on my hue and saturation panel. And now I can go ahead and play with that color. So I think this one, I want it to be, let's try more of a green. So maybe about there. And let's play with the lightness and darkness, see what we can get out of that. I think about where it is good. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. Then we're going to come down to the layer that has our symbol on it, and we're going to go ahead and delete that. Now let's go ahead and open up our potions file. So I already have open right here, and I've already shrunken down my potion, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it in where my original symbol used to be. And now I can put that potion in there like so. Hit enter. And it's getting a really weird green tint because it's underneath the green layer. So what we can do is we can drag that above the green layer and we'll no longer have that problem. But we'll still get that highlight over it, so it will look like it's inside of the gem. Now let's do our last one. So I'm going to go ahead and close this folder, and I'll open up my last folder, and I'm going to come into my color layer and turn on the hue and saturation panel, and let's go ahead and play with that color. So this one, I think I want it to be a red. It's more of a purple, so I'm going to bring it back a little bit to about there. Maybe a little bit more towards the orange side. I like the red side better. So we'll do right there. Let's also play with the lightness and darkness to see how we like that. So if I'm going to bring up the lightness, I'm also going to want to bring up the saturation. So I might bring that to about there, but I don't really like that, so I'm going to leave it all at 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Next, let's go ahead and delete that symbol layer. And then we're going to go ahead and open up our sword document. And we can go ahead and copy this and paste it into here. And then we'll shrink that down like so. And we can also rotate this. That'll make it look a little bit more interesting. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And we can also add the effect back to the edge of our sword. So we're going to come down to effects, come to outer glow, and let's go ahead and select the color we want. So I think I want more of a blue. So I'm going to come into my baby blues, hit OK, and maybe bring my opacity up to 100%. And then maybe bring my size up a little bit larger. So about there would be good. Hit OK. Great. Now we can also make our potion stand out a little bit more if we add a shadow behind it. So I'm going to close this folder and open up that folder again. Come to my potion layer and add an effects to it, and I'm going to add a drop shadow. Let's see how that looks. Alright, the way I have it set up right now looks good. We can play with the opacity a little bit, but I think where the opacity is good. We can change the size, but I'll leave it about where it is. So I'm going to leave all my settings just like this, and hit OK. And now you see if we turn off that drop shadow makes it stand out a lot more. That brings us to the end of this project. I hope you enjoyed creating these gem buttons. Thanks for watching this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.